Okay, I'm going off the cuff here, but I've just been thinking about these issues and wanted to address some points and bring up some questions that I have about this subject. The subject is antinatalism, and it's kind of making the rounds, I guess, or maybe it has been for a while. I've been looking at it for the past, I guess, month or so. Been looking into it primarily from the YouTube user in Mindham. And so I guess this video is in a way addressed to him if he wants to broach my video at all. So some of the things that I actually think it's a compelling argument in a lot of ways, and it's pretty difficult to deal with because it kind of tackles things that we are just by our nature very attached to, and so it challenges that attachment. You're obviously attached to what you are and who you are and your life, and you value it. I think most people value their lives. And that brings me to my first sort of point, or I don't know if it's a point as much as a question. Like, I'm not really understanding this aspect of the argument. Now, it's clear to me that the argument is meant, or it's based on sort of an equation, a value equation, where you're basically weighing suffering against everything else, and especially pleasure. And you're saying that just the suffering just way outweighs the pleasure, and therefore it needs to stop. Life itself needs to stop, because if knowing what we know about life, there's really no need for it, right? I mean, there's no reason behind it. There's nothing going on. It's just we're sort of floating on top of this ridiculous constant DNA replication that doesn't have anything to do with us as conscious beings. It's just the circumstance that we've been forced into, so to speak. And the fact that sentient creatures suffer being a bad thing, that means that we should strive to end the suffering by ending sentience. And what I don't understand about the equation is it doesn't seem to address sentience itself. And wouldn't we have to say that sentience itself has value? Okay, so I'm interjecting here. I'm interrupting myself, as it were. I just want to put in this video by Sam Harris, which I think addresses a couple of points, but mainly addresses this I guess in a way sort of addresses this point about sentience that I'm making, or this question I'm asking. So here's the clip from a debate with William Lane Craig.
It seems to me that there's a distinction in your argument that I'd like you to discuss, which is the conceptual possibility of the most miserable world and its material possibility. So basically what I'm asking is whether you can cite any evidence to believe that this is not the world that is most miserable, or otherwise. So if you can't, let's assume this is the world with the material conditions for the most misery to exist. Then wouldn't it be moral to destroy it all? Destroy all consciousness? So I'm just wondering, how would you distinguish that this is not the worst possible world?
Well, it may be the only world with conscious life. I mean, I think, I doubt that given the trillion-fold universe we're living in, but we don't have any evidence of life elsewhere, much less conscious life. But so your question cuts to the issue of, what if it's all about well-being. Well, why don't we just, kill all the unhappy people in their sleep tonight? Okay, wouldn't that raise sort of the aggregate level of well-being on Earth? And there are infinite number of thought experiments like that you can come up with that seem to push on this concern. Well, if it's just about suffering, well, you can just eradicate it painlessly for people, and you have increased the net well-being. But all of those thought experiments neglect all of the cascading effects of living in a world in which we do that sort of thing, with the consequences of doing that. So why don't we, in the classic experiment that everyone trots out is, what if you're a doctor and you realize that you have somebody who could benefit from the organs of, you have 5 people who could benefit from the organs of one person who's sitting in your waiting room. So you go into your waiting room, you knock him out, and you euthanize him, you vivisect him, and you give away his organs. Okay, that seems like it's a net benefit to 5 people. Okay, but if we were all living in a world where at any moment your doctor could vivisect you and steal your organs, that would have rather obvious, ghastly consequences that none of us would want to submit to. And our intuitions about the sanctity of human life, caring for people, treating people as ends in themselves rather than means to some other end, all of that conserves intuitions we have about trust and its importance in life, and all of these ways in which we are knit together as a community, and ways in which we only rise or fall together. I mean, so in a very important sense, our happiness is dependent upon the happiness of others. I mean, we are not atomized selves that are radically separate. So this idea that killing everyone, I mean, first of all, killing everyone would eradicate all the suffering, yes, but it would also foreclose all the happiness. I mean, it would nullify every possibility of experience. So if you think that a universe where the lights are on is better than a universe where the lights are off, then turning the lights off is worse. But I could imagine a universe which it would be worth turning the lights off in. I mean, the Christian hell is one of them. You'd be doing people a lot of good.
The question is whether you know this
sorry,
universe
no
is
follow-ups.
But you didn't.
I'm going to be really strict about this.
Thank you for answering the question.
Well, to answer your question, if this is the only world, well, then it is by definition both the most miserable and the happiest. And everything in between. And now I just have no idea what else is out there.
Okay, so then the question is, if we've determined that the lights are better off being off in the universe, if that's the more desirable scenario, why should we really think that? Why wouldn't we say, well, the base value is that the lights are better on? It's better to have the lights on in the universe. Why wouldn't we say that's the base value rather than making some other base value and then determining that the lights should be off, which is, I think is what's going on here. Why should we not just make that our base value? And how does that fit into the equation? I understand the suffering versus the pleasure thing, versus, our grandiose, even our sort of grandiose delusions of things. I think that even if you have a delusion on something, just the fact that, I might think that, I don't know, surfing or something is really just the greatest thing in the world. That could be a complete and total delusion. But the fact that I enjoy it, maybe the delusion thing is a little overplayed. Even delusions can have a certain value from a certain perspective. Just throwing that out there. That's not. I just actually thought of that just now. But yeah. So how does sentience itself fit into that equation, and how would you evaluate it, and how would you be able to really judge it? A lot of this seems really subjective, and I understand that a lot of people have brought that up before, and I guess the counter to that is, well, it's not really entirely subjective because, obviously the suffering is, and I'm just paraphrasing and trying to remember, but obviously the suffering is more extreme and probably more frequent. So that maybe needs to be cleared up, I think. But on to a different point, sort of a thought experiment, I guess. And this sort of addresses the idea that not only should we stop having children and all that, we should actively seek to end life on the planet, period. And let's say, for instance, that the governments of the world came together and were convinced that this was a rational and good thing to do. And they wanted to make sure that this was, the right course of action by taking, and let's just imagine that this is possible, that they are able to quantify the level of, we're first of all, we're able to figure out which beings on the planet are actually sentient. I think that also gets a little overplayed in the argument. Sentience is a little bit tricky, I think. But let's say we're able to evaluate which beings are actually sentient, meaning they have consciousness and actually have experience. So let's say that we're able to evaluate that, and we're also able to evaluate and quantify the level of suffering with the level of pleasure, or just everyday sort of existence, just not, kind of in the middle. And I do think that maybe, even though it is subjective, if you could come up with some sort of quantification of that, I do think that you probably would have, I think it's pretty safe to say that you would have, like, if you had a middle line and then you had kind of data points going up and down, and the upper portion represented the more happier moments, and the bottom portion represented the suffering section. You probably would have a lot more area underneath the graph, underneath the mid-level, than you would above. So yeah, but let's say that they did this and they wanted to evaluate this for a few years, and in doing so, they were able to conclude that yes, the suffering was greater, but that it showed over, say, a significant portion of time that this appeared to be diminishing. In other words, it's kind of a logarithmic function, or maybe not logarithmic exactly, but you have like maybe an asymptote that you're reaching. So if you did, it doesn't have to be that, but you just see improvement. Like maybe at some point, it looks like either you're just going to reach a tolerable level, or you're actually going to improve it, and then you're seeing a trend where maybe you could see more area above that graph. So given that circumstance, would that affect the judgment at all? Would that, just seeing that type of improvement just as a thought experiment, would that affect how we should think about that, and what should be our course of action? And also kind of related to that idea is, how do we really evaluate that? Is there a threshold that's met? I mean, so far what I'm hearing is, well, there's just so much suffering, it's ridiculous. This just doesn't make any sense. It's just so much suffering. Well, what if there was improvement, and is there a threshold that you would reach? I'm not saying that any of this is possible, or even I I guess it's you wouldn't. It might not be real at all. We might not be making improvements. I don't really know. We could be. We might not be. I'm not really sure. I sort of think, at least from a human perspective, maybe we have improved somewhat, but I'm not sure. It's a real tough question, right? So, yeah, I'm just curious to know how that would change things, and I'm curious to know if there is a threshold, if there is a level of tolerance. And also, isn't this really a lot of individual, the way you experience things? Like, people experience pain in different ways, and doesn't that make things more tricky? Some people seem to just cloak themselves in pain. I'm reminded of the song by Garbage, I'm only happy when it rains. I mean, that's kind of what it's talking about, right? I guess maybe in a way it's more, let's spread how I'm feeling around to the rest of the world, but it seems like it's also a little bit of, I'm just soaking myself in this misery pool, and that's how I want to live my existence. I prefer that than, and maybe that does have something to do with deluding yourself and all that. I'd rather just, accept everything as crap than delude myself into thinking that it's actually real. There's actually real good going on. But yeah, I think that's all I want to say right now. That's all I want to bring forward into this discussion, if I'm doing that. So I actually appreciate anyone that wants to respond to it. This is a very tricky subject, and while I find this idea compelling, I don't know if I'm convinced, and I think it is a tough sell. Yeah, let's explore it a little more, and I'm curious about it, so help me out. All right, thanks for listening.